Jordan, what up? First off, man, where you joining me from?
Hey man, hey, I'm in a little town in Montana, just joining from you. I came outside kind of in the woods where the kids won't attack while I'm on. So
Nice. Is that so that's like your backyard?
yeah. Got some
Very
mushroom logs here, inoculated these logs with mushrooms, so they should start pumping them out this fall, which would be
Hold on,
cool.
what is that?
It's like you actually get like a bunch of logs and you drill holes in them and stuff like mycelium, like mushroom roots basically in them, and then over time they start to produce like farming mushrooms,
Not psychedelic mushrooms?
not these, no. A funny thing you're asking if I left Virginia, but man, they grow everywhere down there, so no need to farm those.
When did y'all make the move from Virginia?
Oh, September-ish or something like that. So not long. I've been up here working the last couple of years, spending the summers up here, and then we just finally decided to make the move. I missed the West, we had Virginia was awesome also, but I was just really missing the Western nature.
Montana, you're in Montana, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah,
man, it's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful.
It's awesome to be so inspired by outdoors when you're here, like, oh, I want to go there,
Right, plenty of adventures. And before we started, dude, I was telling you kind of how I found out about you, and of course it started with Alone, and then you went on Rogan, and that's really kind of how I heard about you. And then I watched your season. But dude, what was life like before your appearance on Alone? Like, what were you doing? What was your childhood like? Let's start with your childhood. What was your childhood like?
I was actually born in a little cornfield town in Illinois, but when I was pretty young, we moved to Idaho, where my family and stuff was kind of from. And then so I grew up on a farm in North Idaho. Pretty we were homeschooled, had a pretty ran around outside a lot, and really good childhood. I'd have no complaints. Thought it was a great place to grow up. I spent but yeah, I mean, kind of typical childhood, I'd all getting into mischief and stuff out on the farm and in the woods up there. But then as I grew older, I know, my brother went riding freight trains, spent 7 or 8 years doing that. Like, we
tell me about that. You got to tell me more about the freight train riding.
When he was 17, I think, he decided to go visit a friend in Reno, and he hitchhiked down there, and he just it was cool to be free and be able to hitchhike, and travel, but he really didn't like hitchhiking because you had to rely on other people and all this and that. So at some point he met some random hobos. I don't even remember who, and they kind of showed him the ropes on riding trains, and he kind of just took to it right away and just loved the freedom. And honestly, I remember, I'm 5 years younger than him, but I remember he basically disappeared for a good long time. He'd call every once in a while. He's in Baltimore, he's over there. But he just got on trains and started riding around and, making a network of friends. And he did it for years. And then when I was 18 or something, he invited me to come join him and just ride the rails. And so I did. Definitely not for as long, but I spent the summer. We rode across the country, up and down the East Coast, and then I came back, did a little bit of riding on my own, and it was just kind of a neat. It was the first experience I had of real freedom. You just kind of don't have any schedules, doing just what you want. Yeah.
Were you able to look up the train path or schedule to know where you were going?
That was interesting. There was a few methods. That was before cell phones, so I think now I'm sure you could. But before, you'd have a map, railroad map, and you just make your best guess based on where the line's gonna go. And sometimes it would split off and go completely the wrong direction, But you can't be in a hurry when you're doing.
Yeah.
But it's not a good way to travel to a meeting if you got a meeting.
What did
there was a real old hobo, or there was an old hobo that used to compile. He was a genius level guy, and he would just compile all the information on every train train yard in the country and put out this little pamphlet that you could read, and basically it would tell you like, usually the train's coming out of the south side of this yard, you know, there's a good place to camp under the bridge over here. You know, he had this whole little pamphlet that just, you know, pretty awesome. So that would be helpful too. But,
Sure. I mean, like today, I'm sure you can just like, you know, Google it and figure out where you're going. But back then, I mean, I just imagine you hopping on and then the train stops and you're kind of like, I don't know where I am. But
that happened all the time. And you'd be stopped for days in some, you know, podunk town in Nebraska and not know where, you know, it's just like it would happen all the time. So, yeah.
Did you get pretty badly injured doing that?
No, I didn't get badly injured. I had like, you know, I definitely ate it a few times trying to jump off a train that was moving too fast or whatever. Definitely potential to get injured. We have friends and stuff that are missing legs and this and that from accidents, but I didn't. We spent a night in jail here and there, but in general, I've stayed pretty much accident free.
What'd your parents think?
You know, they'd gotten used to it with my brother, I think. So I just think that they're pretty good at just like letting us go do our thing as long as they were not concerned that we were alcoholics or anything. So they kind of, I don't know. I think Mom, I remember being worried when Ben first started and he, you know, rarely called, but by the time I came around, I don't think she cared anymore.
Dude, I can only imagine what my mom would be doing. She'd be freaking out. Were you into wilderness survival at that time?
You know, not in specifically. Of course, I grew up in Idaho on a farm and stuff, but my dad wasn't a big outdoorsman. He was, you know, an engineer too, and he worked 9 to 5 and pretty much our whole lives. So so like, of course I went outdoor, we camped a lot, did all that. We owned, you know, my parents had 160 acres that was our backyard. So dang. We had a really nice spot, but it wasn't like a specific, like survivalist bend. I wasn't trying to do that. Really that developed more in my time in Siberia and Russia. Yeah. I think that's where that whole skill set got really honed and developed.
What took you to Siberia?
It was initially we had an adopted brother, and when he grew up, he decided he wanted to find his biological mom. When he did, it turned out he had a biological brother that was going to go to Siberia. And that guy was like, hey, you should come. You should, like, where they're building an orphanage over there, come help him out. And I prayed about it. I was like, I felt like that was the right thing to do. So I went over there, but I basically just bought a ticket for a year. I kind of dove in deep. And so the guy that bought, my brother's brother, he was there a few months, and then he came home, and then I was just there in Siberia and continued to, help build that orphanage. And then I went and lived with Russian families in a different village to really get immersed in Siberian village life. And
what is Siberian village life?
Yeah, it's pretty neat. It's I lived with I bounced between two families. They had both been in prison, so both were ex-cons that had kind of turned their life around and then had families and then had their little mini farms. So each of them had a cow or two that they'd milk every morning and every evening, and you'd let the cow out in the morning to graze around in the village, just kind of free range the village, and then in the night bring it in and milk it. And then you'd go get hay. Haying was a big thing, planting potatoes, all the classics, except you'd hay with a scythe, like an old scythe, and instead of bales, they'd like pile it in a classic pile and go pitchfork it into a trailer and bring it home. It was real, very villagey life.
Was that were you obviously you were surviving on your own, but I don't know how much you were in the nature. Was that like you had people over there?
Oh, yeah. Well, the other thing about Russia, that's kind of where I really enjoyed going mushroom picking and stuff like that. They definitely are into that. But what really did it was after, so those guys have been in prison. I was telling you what that I lived
Mm-hmm.
with. And they would always tell me, "Oh, you got to meet our buddy up north," because he was a native. He was a fur trapper and a reindeer herder and all these things. And he had also been in prison with them. so they became close in prison. And he was like, "Man, you got to meet our buddy up north." And finally that guy came through and basically invited me to come live with him. All these guys kind of liked me because they got an impression of Americans as just being like dorky businessmen and this and that, can't do anything, like. And then, but he's like, "Oh, there's a guy. This is the only." That always, my buddy Eager would always sit whenever he introduced me. "This is the only good American. He can work. He can." So when, of course, they said the same thing to the native guy, really vouched for him. We're like, "Oh, you take this guy. He's awesome." And so then I went up with him, and he was a fur trapper. And so I don't know if you've seen that Happy People documentary, a real interesting one, worth watching.
I haven't.
You should write it down. It's a good
Got
watch. Yeah. Anyway, he's there. It's about fur trappers in Siberia, and that's what the guy I lived with did. And so we went out for whatever it was, months into his wilderness, and he kind of showed me the ropes on that whole thing. And eventually he let me, I split off from him and spent 5 weeks opening up his like old trap lines that he hadn't used in like 7 years, and kind of just living off the land by myself for, it was just that's about what it was, 5 weeks. And then anyway, all that said, over time, and I built trust with him, and he was like, "Hey, all my cousins are reindeer herders. I got to take you out to them, and you got to live with them." So one day he like just drove me out on a snowmobile out to these teepees in the woods. But it's like a long adventure. We're already in some remote northern village, and then there's another native village you have to get to that's 150 kilometers away, but there's no roads to it, so you have to fly a helicopter there. So we got on a helicopter and got to this native village, and then from there took some old Soviet snowmobile way out into the woods, and he just dropped me off at this tribe basically. But they were his cousins and stuff, and he was just like, "Hey, this guy, this guy's great." Vouched for me, and so they just took me in with open arms, honestly, just like one of their own. Immediately were like joking with me and having fun and taking me on all the adventures. And so, and I was just blown away. Like I didn't really know people still lived like that. So it was just fascinating.
I bet a lot of people now don't realize people still live like that.
Right. Yeah, totally. It was really cool to see. So I loved it. And I kept, my first trip there was just a couple months, but then I went back. I had to come back to the States, get my new visa and all that. Then I went back and basically spent a few years with them, so.
Yeah. I mean, were you there? I thought I read like a total of 10 years.
Well, it was all my 20s, basically. I spent going back and forth to Russia, but it was, I'd come to the States and earn money and then go back over. And so it was about half that time. I spent a little over 5 years.
Okay. Do you speak fluent Russian?
Yeah.
Говорю
по-русски нормально.
All right. So you get back to the States. You've spent a ton of time in Russia. Obviously, by now, I mean, your survival skills are probably pretty darn good.
What was good about that was you see what really works, practical. Like this is what people in the wilderness are doing to survive. So that was helpful.
It. Like how they're actually living, not some cliche things.
Separate the wheat from the chaff a little bit on what is helpful.
Also, were you in? Is it the area? Is it called like Taiga? Taiga?
Yeah, in the Taiga. Yeah.
Taiga.
So most of that Russian northern forest is called the Taiga, and I was way deep into the middle of it. I was actually in the least inhabited part of Russia, so it was like very, very remote central Siberia.
Is there also other taigas, I guess, in other parts of the world? Because I thought I read there might be one in Canada.
Oh, they might consider it's really similar. I think it's just those in the West, we call it the boreal forest. So like in Canada, the boreal forest. And when for some reason in the Eastern hemisphere, we call it the taiga. So
Got it.
Yeah, it's all that. That's that whole northern strip of forest land
Gotcha.
below the tundra. Yeah.
So you get back to the States, you know, you decide not to go back to Siberia or Russia. What are you doing in the States to make a
Well,
living?
you know, I'd go back, and honestly, I just kept going back and figured I might continue to. But on one of my trips back, I met my, future wife, and then and I'd still go back to Russia. But then I got married, and she went with me back, but then of course we had kids, and it started to get harder.
Do you have 3 now? Do you have 3 kids?
3 kids. Yeah. Honestly, we wanted to go back last year, but it was COVID, and then this year, of course, with the war and all that, not really an option. But
a little bit more difficult.
A little more difficult. Oh, who's trying to call? I think I'm getting bad.
Oh, you're good.
How do I do this? Well, it might just beep in the background.
Hey, you're good. No worries. You're back.
Anyway, so I got back from Russia, as I had a little family, and I was just working construction with my brother in Virginia and keep him fairly busy doing that. We did a lot of bow hunting and a lot of this and that. But then and one of my brother's old train hopping friends told me, like, hey, you got to check out this Alone show. It's pretty interesting. And I think it was that season 2 had just come out. And so we like binge watched it really fast. And I was like, man, everybody watches. I could do that.
That's what you said?
Well, that's what we were thinking. Like, Rock and I were talking to each other. Oh yeah, we could do that. Let's sign up. And so he never bothered to sign up, but I did that evening. But it was just on a whim, and I kind of sent a link to some of my YouTube videos with the natives, and totally forgot about it. And then and sure enough, it wasn't for I was season 2, and I didn't get a call until season 6. So it was 3 or 4 years later. Just out of the blue, they called up and like, hey, this is the Alone Show, and we'd like to, have you on season 6. And
dang, so it was a couple years between you signing up and you getting the call.
Yeah.
So you'd almost completely forgot about it.
Totally. I think I had to pause and be like, wait, oh yeah, whoa, what?
Okay.
Yeah, I forgot about that. But I was like, oh yeah, sure. I mean, as long as the door opens, I'll walk through it. And so it kept going, and sure enough, they slapped me out there, which was awesome. Because when I used to go to Russia, I would think to myself, man, I spent my whole 20s going back for it. I was like, I should be getting a career of some sort.
Yeah, you need to be documenting this.
So it was pretty neat that all kind of panned out somehow. But
did they have to vet you or anything, like before you went on or through the official process?
Oh yeah, there's a whole vetting process. They gave me pretty strong hints early on that I was like kind of high on their list of people they wanted on, but they still have a large list and whittle it down to about 25 people or something that go to a boot camp. And then from that 25, they pick the top 10 to go on the show. So there's still a whole process you have to make it through. And you don't really know if you're going to get on until, a month or so before the show starts.
When did you know where you're going to be?
I don't remember exactly, but it was only a couple weeks before. So you don't have much lead time on that. So
but I guess for you, it was probably a pretty good spot because, explain to people where you ended up.
I was very happy with the spot, and it felt, and of course, I don't know what it's like going to be up there in Canada, but it was literally on the same parallel as I was in Siberia. So very similar environment in a way. And I'd been home with the kids, raising the family for a couple of years and doing construction. So I was like, I'm a little rusty on all this stuff.
Yeah.
But when I got out there, I was like, whoa, I feel like I'm right at home. Like I actually feel like, I got right back into the flow, and it was like, oh, this is cool. It just all came back to me like a old language I thought I forgot, and then it just was all there. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
and
like
so then
riding a bike for you, man.
Yeah, exactly. Like riding a bike. And so, yeah, exactly. I melded right in, and it was a great location because it's a spot that had things you could, exploit. It had some fishing. It had a lot of small game. It had big game. And so it rewarded activity. So
northern Canada, right?
Yeah, northern Canada.
More on the east side or west side?
Kind of central Canada. It's on a place called Great Slave Lake, and really, really cool spot they found. Really remote also, and yeah, just it was a great place for that show, and yeah, I flowed right back into the old.
What was the biggest thing you were worried about on the
Oh man,
survival
I got to
front?
say, like in hindsight, it's easy for me to say I just shouldn't have worried so much, but I can say truthfully, I enjoyed the experience almost the whole time, but I was almost just stressed too all the time because I was just thinking I put too much pressure on myself, and I was just like, man, you're gonna starve, you're gonna stay. Even after I got the moose, I would just think, man, somebody else, of course, is gonna get a bear, and so you're still gonna lose, but it's not gonna be you lose it 70 days, you're gonna lose it 150 days.
Yeah, because on your season there was no limit, right?
Well, there's no limit on my season, that was literally the hardest part for me. Is I stressed a lot about, like, when the show ended, I think my first words, and I think they edited out of the show, but I was like, already, like, I was shocked. I didn't imagine that it was going to end that soon. And I just, yeah, with an indefinite end, I just thought, man, we could be out here a really long time. And and if somebody else gets big game, we could be out here 6 months and I could potentially still lose. And that would really suck. So I never let myself like relax and enjoy it as much as I should have. Of course, having that stress doesn't really help you, but
you say that, but from an outsider's perspective, watching you felt almost the most natural and like kind of just like going along with it as anybody, like less stressed.
And I kind of have that personality. So that was, like the stress it's not going to show itself in the same way as it might. I just didn't enjoy it as much as I could have, I could have I still enjoyed it, but I spent more time than I needed to, like if you want to say, how could I have perfected my experience out there? I definitely spent more time than I needed to stressing about the future when I actually didn't need to at all. Like,
dude, I mean, you were looking at your competitors, you were in a very good spot compared to a lot of them. And you got, I mean, didn't you get your moose in like day 25 or something like that?
I was in day 20, 21, something like that. It was pretty early, and I'd already snared, over 20 rabbits, and it didn't show much of the fishing, but I got tons of, a lot of pounds of fish.
I read that.
Fish, big ones.
I heard in another interview you did, you said you got like a ton of fish, and watching the show, I didn't see.
You would never know.
I think you got one fish at the end or something, but
right.
I didn't know like you even had that much fish. But what? Tell me about the moose. Like, how did you see the moose? How'd you track the moose? How'd you kill
the moose? Was one of that was one of my most exciting days of my life, because you do just have so much. There's a lot of stress when you feel like you're just gonna starve, and I'd been catching all those rabbits, but still losing weight, and you're just like,
rabbit.
This is not gonna work, and so I've got to do something better than this. And then I had missed a moose prior, but I'd kind of done a lot to set up a moose encounter. I'd found tin cans and built trip lines, and put my shelter in a spot that was really conducive to potentially hunting moose and to the big game traffic. And I called them a bunch, and I'd done all this work to try to set up an encounter. And then this giant moose, the biggest one I've seen, went through my tin cans, and I heard him go clank, 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 and then it got scared itself running through the cans, and it ran literally out towards my shelter and then turned and looked back towards the cans. So when I came out of my shelter, it was sitting like quartering away from me, kind of almost broadside. It was like a perfect shot. And I snuck up, but it was out in a mud flat, and so I just couldn't judge distance very well. And so I went to take my shot, and I was like, it was also so big, I thought it was closer than it was. So I was like, man, I think it's probably 30 yards. And I shot. Later, I went and pasted. It was like 43 yards. So I was way off, but it was like so big, it threw me off. And then I shot, and the arrow went short, and I was like, crap. And I went to grab another arrow, and I was like, oh no, I grabbed my camera, not my quiver. Like, what an idiot. And so then I just watched as the moose like looked at me and then trotted off. And I was like, no. But I followed it, I actually noticed right away that like I was disappointed, but I was surprisingly not upset. I was like, man, that was so cool to see, like that was like seeing a dinosaur. But I immediately was like, man, I got to figure out how to get another opportunity. So I followed the tracks, tracked it for a ways, and then I was like, man, I guess this thing's going between, like, it was probably 300-400 yards, but not cliffs, but there's kind of a valley there. And you could see that animals would kind of funnel through that valley. And so I was like, man, maybe I should, like the natives, we used to spend the springs and the summers building reindeer fences to keep their like semi-domestic reindeer in like giant 30-kilometer circumference fences. So just these huge fences. And I thought maybe I just need to build a fence, try to funnel all the animal traffic into one spot.
Very good idea. Yeah.
I just thought, but man, that's a lot of work. Am I really going to burn all those calories? And I was like, you know what? I'm not out here to like screw around. I'm to make it happen or I'm not. That was one good thing about being skinny, is I knew that like it wasn't going to happen unless I like had to outproduce everyone. I couldn't just like barely squeeze by a victory. So I was like, man, all right, well, I'm going to make it happen and build that whole fence and put some more tin cans up and all that. And I was out trapping rabbits and hunting grouse and whatever all the time. So one morning I was out there and I heard those cans clank. I was like, no way. So I like ran over my little funnel mouth in the bush and waited. And sure enough, he came like lumbering along the fence line. Dang. And I got a shot and shot it. And I was so excited, and it ran off. And I was like, man, I felt like a good shot. Like, holy cow, you're all excited. But then, but I was also like, I did hit a little bit farther to the right than I wanted. So like, okay, I'm going to just go wait an hour. So I went home and skinned this rabbit I'd got, nervously, like trying to burn time. And I was like, you know what? I got to look for this thing. So I went and followed the moose blood, found some good bubbly blood. So it'd been hitting the lung. But then honestly, the blood just dried up. The tracks were gone. And I was just like, no way am I going to lose this moose. I got, it was a very up and down day. So like I hit the moose, then I couldn't find it. So I thought I lost it. And then I found the moose, which was super exciting again. But of course it was just sitting there and I couldn't get close enough to finish it off or anything. So I just had to wait. And then it would sometimes stand up and I'd be like, oh no, it's going to run away. Then it would lay back down and then it would stand up for like 3 hours. And then finally it died. And it was just the most surreal moment. I walk up to it, touch it, it's actually dead. You're just like, oh, holy hell. Like such a impossible like level of joy to recreate almost, because it's just such a moment. But
at that moment, do you think you're even thinking about the show, or were you thinking about just
no, you're
cool,
almost
like, the moment was?
Yeah, you're not thinking you're in a show. You're just thinking I'm gonna starve to death if I don't get this thing. Like, because yeah, you're not thinking of yourself on a show anymore. You're just thinking I have to somehow survive. Yeah. And so then, it was a neat view into, what our ancestors, of course, they all went through that all the time. Like
crazy
pressure's on. They finally made something happen. Like, yeah. And then interestingly enough, like I had this whole moose, but also, especially if I had a family out there, it doesn't give you that much downtime. It's like, okay, I got this moose. Now I got to get something else, or we're just going to starve again. So, it's interesting.
So, and like you said at the beginning, you thought you could be out there for 6 months. I mean, you were planning way ahead of, I guess eventually when you did end up winning at day 77, you could have easily been out there for double that with what you had.
I genuinely thought if I could, I'd be out there double. I thought 140, 150 days. I thought everybody else would quit even if they had food, because it would have been such a cold, dark winter, which I had been through, so I was fine with, but I knew it would be really miserable. So, I'm sorry, I lost track of the question. What were you asking?
No, I was just saying about how well prepared you were to go longer.
Oh,
like you're saying, stressing really about like needing to get more food, but
yeah, I talked about that the other day with somebody. But it's like expecting the worst is kind of, it definitely is a good strategy. Like I definitely never thought I was gonna win. Never tried to get too hopeful, I guess, on positive outcomes. It was just like I would expect it to be bad, but then I would be constantly pleasantly surprised, you know? So it's like,
But dude, I mean, like
yeah,
you said, you can't get too happy because within like a couple days, you had a Wolverine trying to take your
right. Yeah. So
moose from you.
like, oh, I killed a moose, I win, it's gonna cruise through, and then all of a sudden a Wolverine, then you're devastated again. But it's kind of like, oh yeah. So then a Wolverine came, and it was a whole nother kind of epic battle. You know, you only see a little bit on the show, but that whole encounter just rolled out over weeks, because he would come in and get bolder and bolder over time, and I would, you know, try different things to try to catch him or dissuade him. But we were only, you know, you weren't allowed to trap him or anything, so we could really only shoot him with the bow as our only
I mean, didn't you end
option.
up building like a pretty big stand for your
Yeah,
meat
so
to put on?
yeah, we had built those in Siberia. That's how the natives store their goods and stuff, are up in those stands. So I built this big elevated food cache, and I had never dealt with Wolverines before. And I was like, well, hopefully this is gonna stop them. And quite honestly, I was really excited when I built it, because I was like, oh yes, I might have solved my Wolverine problem. But well, the little more background on the story is there were two Wolverines, and the first one I killed, which was just like, yes, you know, like I solved my problem. And then I was out eating some moose meat a couple days later over a fire, and I heard another Wolverine in the woods. I was like, no way.
No.
Like, just wishing, like, I hope I'm just imagining that sound, but I knew I wasn't. So I was like, crap. And so that one I could no longer play offense on. I couldn't hunt it like I did the prior one. I had to like just play defense. So that's when I built the big tower and try to put all my food up there. Honestly, the way we built them in Siberia is we built a big tower like that and then box it in with a little mini log cabin on top. But I never went that far. And, you know, sure enough, I probably should have, because he made it up there also and stole food off.
Did you leave your ladder up one night?
Well, I did. And that was, I think and when I went out the next day, I was like, oh, you idiot. The Wolverine got up there, but it actually hadn't climbed the ladder. And
Okay.
so it climbed up. I had one of the 4 posts was really like knotty, and so it gave him too much to grip on, and so he climbed up that. So on that post, after that, I put those little snare loops all around, and then I never had another problem. So but it was just, yeah, another whole battle with these 2 Wolverines that were, and it's amazing, everything's out there trying to survive, you know, so it's like life or death for them too, and it's stakes are high, and yeah, pretty wild.
I mean, dude, wilderness nature, it is wild. You were able to get or bring 10 items, like anything from a saw, bow and arrow you've talked about. I think you had like some fishing line. What do you believe the most important item was, and then like the most least important?
Yeah, good question. I think it's hard not to have a axe. Like the natives would always say that you only need one tool in the woods to survive, and that's an axe. And so, and if I had an axe, I'm not saying I would survive, but I'd have a chance. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
So I think the axe is the most important, and my least important was probably my saw, because I did have an axe. I didn't really need the saw, and I took it as an item to maybe save calories, but in the end, I just didn't use it that much. It was helpful building that food cache and here and there, but could have done everything with a saw. I had a few items that I was debating, like, should I take the saw? Should I take a gill net? Should I take an extra tarp to build a boat?
Yep.
In the end, I went with the saw, but in hindsight, had I been on the next season, I would have taken a gill net, because I just didn't realize there'd be so many big fish right next to the shore.
Sure.
You know, yeah, but anyway.
How worried see, for me, I mean, of course, obviously food and water and whatnot, but staying warm. What was your, I mean, I've heard you say like in a teepee, you knew you'd be warm. Like to me, I feel like I would have been freezing in a teepee. So were you ever worried about the temperature?
No, you know, it's funny. There was a lot of footage the producers had of me complaining that it was too hot out. None of it made the show, but of course, when I got the moose, I was just like, all right, let's have a cold freeze and preserve my meat for me, of course, and it never happened. So then I had to smoke it all and all that. And then, and once I got the moose too, then you have a nice warm hide to sleep on, which is nice. And I just knew I had been through all that weather. So I just knew that I wasn't going to, as long as I had calories, my body was going to be able to keep me warm. And I knew if I didn't have calories, I was going to freeze, whether or not I had a nice warm place or not. You're going to. So it was all about the calories on that one. And honestly, the biggest thing out there is you don't ever want to sweat. So there was one time in particular, I remember I was trying to chip ice holes and I got too sweaty, like chipping holes in the ice.
Yep.
And it was actually a real pain because then all your clothes are wet and you got to dry them out, but you can't sit out in that weather when it's that cold out, without clothes. So yeah, don't sweat.
So sweating, you're losing your hydration?
No, it's sweating. What happens is while you're working, you're fine. But as soon as you stop working,
oh, you're cold.
You're wet. And then you're wet and it's cold outside. And then all of a sudden you just freeze. So that's mainly what it is. If you allow yourself to sweat when it's really cold out, you'll
makes sense.
Freeze later. So
what about hydration? Or did you just heat the water, boil the water?
Important. Yeah, and I would drink. I was really careful about hydrating. I'd found some of those tin cans, so I'd always boil tea, basically pine needle tea or something to get a few vitamins, and then always have cans set out that I could go easily drink, because if it's a pain, you won't do it and then you'll be dehydrated. So I'd always have water to drink, and at night I would set hot rocks around my water so it wouldn't freeze. So if I woke up in the middle of the night, I could get drink. And hydration is really important. I think a lot of people suffer from dehydration and cramps and things like that out there.
And I was thinking like, oh, you got to stay hydrated, of course, like out in the wilderness. And so all those, I guess, more physical like challenges you're gonna have. Right. But the name of the show is Alone. And watching the seasons, I feel like more people leave because of mental challenges of being alone. How did you combat the alone feelings of being alone?
Yeah, that's what a fascinating question. I've thought about it, of course, a lot, because especially when you watch a show, you look back and you had such a different experience than some of the other people, and you're just like, and you wonder why.
Good spirits, dude. Like,
and it was like I was, so I think it's a multifaceted answer. Of course, part of it was perspective. So if I was really honest, which is I sometimes feel awkward saying because I know it was serious, but it actually was just not. It turned out to not be that hard of an experience for me. Like, I wouldn't say alone was the hardest thing in my life or anything like that. The loneliness part of it, I experienced much more acutely in Russia. Like that first year when I went to Russia and I didn't know the language and even though there were people around, I felt really isolated. And I remember laying in bed just thinking, oh, I wouldn't wish this on anybody. This is miserable. But then that lasted for a whole year, basically until I could learn the language. Whereas alone, it's like, man, I'm out here a few months, big deal. And I'd traveled enough to Russia that for year stints at a time that I knew that I'd come back after a year and talk to my loved ones and they'd still be my friends and family. They still love me. We catch up relatively quickly. You're just like, oh man, I just was gone for a year and when we're hanging out in an afternoon and it feels like we're all right back on the groove. And the 60, 80, 100 days, just I had perspective to lay that against, to where it was definitely worth it, especially if I could pull off a win. It's like I'm gonna save so much more time that I would have to be doing like lame construction jobs that I could.
How much did you win?
500,000.
Dang, that's a lot of money before
taxes, but
sure.
It was
how much did that change like your family life and like you being able to do more things you enjoy?
Probably in some ways surprisingly little, because I don't like after you win it, I don't even know what I want to buy,
Sure. I mean, you're like,
I got money, all right. But what it really did do is it helped me do what I enjoy for a living rather than I was sick of doing construction, but now I can teach these wilderness courses, which are a total blast. And it's something I really feel positive about. So it's allowed me to do a lot better work for a living. And I've been able to buy time with my children while they're little,
support
you know,
family.
instead of, and I know it's not like it's enough money that I don't have to work again and can just cruise, but I can cheat more time home while the kids are little, which I think is valuable. And
could be the most valuable, man.
Yeah. And when you're on a loan and those types of situations, those are universally what people out there realize, like, oh man, I got to spend more time with my family, or,
that's what you end up thinking about.
Yeah. It really helps you recognize your priorities. And that's a problem in modern life, right? We're so distracted. We don't even sometimes have time to think about what are really our priorities in life.
Yeah, man, you spend that much time alone and by yourself, you're really going to, you're going to end up thinking about your family, your friends, your loved ones.
So many things. It's amazing what pops up in your head. It's all in there. All these old memories that you long forgot about. They come back. It's hilarious.
What, some survival techniques or skills for anyone to have? Do you have like a list of importance of what you would say people need to know?
I try to focus a lot on, it's so important to be prepared for any kind of a crisis or this or that. But what I really try to focus on is, we live in an amazing place, in an amazing country with a lot of really cool, natural areas. And I want people to realize that, I think more likely than like an apocalypse happening is that we're all just going to kind of slowly get disconnected from one another and from like the way we're meant to live.
Yep.
And so I just think it's really important for people to realize what we have and be able to take advantage of it for their own health, for their like mental health and all that. And so I like to just teach people things that are less so like hardcore. Well, I teach all the standard build a fire, shelters, catch fish, this and that, but I teach it with a mind to show people that, hey, they can do this. This is accessible to you, and you can now have this part of your, this in your toolkit for life. Like, you can, if you're having a rough time or whatever, you just need a break, you can now go to a really inspiring place, feel confident that you can go up there, catch some fish, have and make a little go of it. So I try to teach enough skills. I try to teach people enough to have that in their back pocket,
Yeah. At the scenario of like somebody like myself, I've actually spent a couple of days actually alone on a wilderness adventure I did. It was just a week. So,
nice.
But for somebody that's
cool,
has no experience and they find themselves in a situation where they're lost, they are in the woods, what is the first thing you tell them to do? Like find a river or find?
Yeah, you definitely need to look at, you want to scout your, like, kind of where you're at, your general area. Just try to put, and then, it depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to get rescued? Because if you're trying to get rescued, then I would say find as much stuff as you can, build a giant fire, and spark it up, a big giant smoky fire. That's probably your best bet. But if you're trying to, like, if you think you're going to be living there a while, you have a little bit different priorities. But I would say getting a fire going is really important. You definitely need a fire. And but in that, you want to put your fire in a location that is conducive to like lasting for a while. So yeah, you want to have firewood and water and be protected from the rain and such as much as you can. And so if you're thinking you're going to be there long enough that you're going to start hunting, that's a whole nother variable you want to put in there. Like, oh man, how's the animal movement? So there's quite a bit to it, but there's a little bit of a difference between like search and rescue type survival situations and a like alone style thing where you're just trying to live as long as you can in the woods. So a kind of different, you'd have a little bit different approaches based on what you're doing.
What are your main, or what are the survival classes you teach now?
I just take people up in the wilderness for like a week, and teach all the survival skills, but I kind of bill them more as like adventure courses, because that's really what I want to open people's mind to, is like, this is so awesome. And I want to share that with people and give them a toolkit to where they can take advantage of how awesome it is to be able to get out, to not have your life, in your phone and like scheduled and this and that, but to get the whole mindset that comes with like wilderness living, but then to have and I kind of frame that within a framework of survival skills. So building your own fishing rods and lures and this and that, and building fires and such. And then once you have all that, yeah.
What are your, how old's your oldest kid?
6.
6. Is it she or he?
She.
Yeah, is she getting 5. Into this stuff yet, or like?
Oh yeah, like we took him out for 2 weeks last summer. We'll do it again this year. Just take him on. I like to get him out in the woods long enough to where you snap into that mindset that you almost feel like that's your home.
Yep.
Because it is a whole different frame of mind, and they love it. They loved that. They still talk about it, and they're excited to go this summer and just go up in the mountains and catch fish and act like that's where we live.
I mean, you kind of do live there anyway, so.
Yeah, we do. And there's a lot of but we have all that kind of stuff incorporated in our life all the time. We were catching morel hunting the other day and going out in the woods all the time. We basically encourage them to spend as much time as they can outside. So
very cool. Well, dude, thank you so much for joining me. Do you have any, like, I mean, from what I would think is you're just going to keep living the way you've been living, but do you have anything on the horizon or any plans you want to, goals you want to do?
Yeah, no, you're kind of right. I just want to, it's sort of just try not to take for granted the time. My wife was telling me the other day, like, of course, in any time you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to another thing. So just trying to like make sure your priorities and your time are all balanced. And that's the main thing, I guess.
If somebody did want to come and take one of your like courses or adventure like weeks with you, how would they figure that out, or how would they find you?
Well, I've got jordanjonas.com where I have all the details, but if you go to Instagram, my thing's Hobo Jordo, and that's the easiest way to follow me, because that's where I update everything. Yeah. So right now they're pretty much sold out for this summer. There might be like 2 or 3 left. Oh yeah, they're very good.
Well, man, thank you so much for joining me. I don't know if I would love to have you back on maybe and talk more about like the skills of like wilderness training and that sort of stuff, more get into the weeds of it. But man, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for getting me on. It was fun chatting.
Yeah, man. And I'll list all your stuff in the show notes so people have where they can find you and update you and all that sort of stuff. But man, it's been a pleasure. And I've loved keeping up with you since the show, and really just like your outlook that you showed on here today about living life and, using the natural resources around you and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate it. We'll be in touch then.
All right. Thank you.